The strangest warnings do not always begin with a bark. Sometimes, they begin with silence. At 7:14 on a bitter January morning, beneath the high glass ceiling of Denver International Airport, Atlas simply stopped moving. 1 second, the 6-year-old German Shepherd was walking beside Officer Ethan Cole with the calm precision of a dog who had crossed crowded terminals thousands of times. The next, his paws were planted against the polished floor as if something invisible had reached down and held him there. Around them, the airport kept breathing. Suitcase wheels rattled over tile. A coffee grinder hummed behind a crowded counter. Boarding announcements drifted from overhead speakers while families hurried toward security with coats folded over their arms and phones glowing in their hands. Beyond the windows, pale winter light stretched across snow-dusted runways, and the distant rumble of jet engines trembled through the glass. Ethan felt the leash tighten. He stopped. Atlas. Heel. Nothing. Ethan glanced down. Atlas was rigid, ears forward, amber brown eyes fixed somewhere beyond the moving crowd. He was not growling. He was not performing the alert Ethan knew so well. There was no sharp turn of the head, no trained signal, no restless search for a scent. The dog just stared. Come on, buddy. Ethan gave the leash a gentle pull. Atlas refused to move. That was when Ethan's expression changed. In 6 years together, Atlas had ignored plenty of distractions, dropped sandwiches, crying toddlers, rolling luggage, nervous passengers who reached for him without asking. But he had never ignored Ethan. Not once. A transportation security officer nearby noticed and slowed. Cole. Ethan lifted one hand, asking him to wait. He followed Atlas's gaze across the terminal. At first, there was nothing unusual. A businessman checked his watch. An older couple struggled with a carry-on. A mother stood near the security line beside a little girl in a red winter coat, perhaps 8 years old, clutching a worn German Shepherd stuffed animal against her chest. Atlas was staring directly at her. Ethan's pulse shifted. Atlas. The shepherd's ears twitched, but his body remained still. The little girl noticed him now. She stopped beside her mother and stared back through the passing travelers. For a few seconds, neither moved. Then Atlas did something Ethan had never seen him do on duty. His ears lowered. His head dipped slightly. A soft whine slipped from his throat, almost too quiet to hear beneath the airport noise. The girl's face changed. Her fingers tightened around the stuffed dog. Her mother said something Ethan could not make out, but the child seemed not to hear her. She took one small step toward Atlas. Ethan watched her closely now. There was something pale about her face beneath the fluorescent lights, something fragile in the way she stood. Atlas leaned forward. The girl looked into his eyes as though searching for someone she had known a long time ago. Then, barely louder than a breath, she whispered a single word. Major. Ethan froze. Atlas did too. And suddenly, the crowded airport did not feel crowded at all. 20 minutes earlier, Ethan Cole had believed the morning would be forgettable. He preferred mornings like that. At 37, the former United States Marine had learned that ordinary days were gifts people rarely noticed until they disappeared. He walked through the terminal with Atlas beside his left leg, one hand resting loosely near the leash while the airport slowly gathered speed around them. Ethan was tall and broad-shouldered, his dark brown hair cut short, his face weathered by years spent beneath harsher skies than Colorado could offer. There was a faint scar near his jaw, but most people noticed his eyes first, steady gray-green eyes that seemed to measure a room without judging anyone inside it. Atlas moved differently. The German Shepherd noticed everything. His black and tan coat caught the cold morning light from the windows, his ears turning toward every suitcase wheel, dropped coffee cup, and distant announcement before dismissing each sound as harmless. They had worked together long enough that Ethan rarely needed to look down. He could feel Atlas through the leash, a quiet language of pressure, rhythm, and trust. Near a coffee stand, Officer Ben Carter fell into step beside them, carrying a paper cup that smelled strongly of cinnamon. He is slowing down, Ben said, nodding toward Atlas. Ethan looked at the shepherd, who was walking with the measured confidence of an animal perfectly aware that he was being discussed. He is 6. That is what I mean. Practically management now. Ethan almost smiled. Atlas glanced at Ben, then continued forward. He notices what we miss, Ethan said. Ben took a sip. That sounds suspiciously like something a proud father would say. Ethan gave him a look, but there was warmth behind it. They passed beneath a departure board glowing blue above the concourse. Outside, ground crews moved through thin patches of snow while vapor drifted behind a waiting aircraft. Inside, the air carried coffee, winter coats, floor polish, and the faint metallic scent of machinery working somewhere beyond the walls. Atlas suddenly slowed. Not enough for anyone else to notice. Ethan did. The leash changed in his hand by barely an inch. He followed the dog's gaze toward gate 42. A woman in a navy coat stood there with a little girl wearing red. The child held an old German shepherd stuffed animal against her chest. One ear had been stitched by hand, and its fur had faded from years of being loved. The girl looked tired, but when she noticed Atlas, a small smile appeared. Atlas took 3 more steps. Then 2. His nose lifted. Ethan felt the leash grow still. "You smell something, buddy?" Atlas did not perform an alert. He only watched the child as she moved toward security with her mother. Ethan touched his harness gently. "Come on." Atlas followed, but his attention remained behind them. Ethan looked back once. The girl was still watching too. For a moment, beneath the announcements and footsteps and rolling luggage, something passed between them that Ethan could not name. Then the crowd closed around her, and Atlas walked on. Ethan thought the moment was over. He was wrong. By the time Ethan and Atlas reached the security checkpoint, the little girl in the red coat had vanished behind a river of travelers. Ethan told himself that Atlas had caught an interesting scent, nothing more. Airports were full of them, hundreds layered together beneath recycled air and fresh coffee. Atlas had spent years learning which ones mattered. Still, Ethan knew the difference between curiosity and attention, and the shepherd had not been curious. He had been listening with his whole body. A few minutes later, Ethan saw the red coat again near gate 42. The girl stood beside her mother beneath the glowing departure screens, hugging the worn German shepherd toy beneath her chin. She looked about 8 years old, small for her age, with light brown hair falling from beneath a knitted cream hat. Her mother knelt to zip a small backpack at the girl's feet. "Lucy, you need some water before we board." "I am okay, Mom." Her voice was soft, but cheerful. "You said that 10 minutes ago." Lucy smiled. "I was okay then, too." Her mother shook her head with the tired affection of someone who had heard that answer many times. Ethan would have walked past without remembering either of them if Atlas had not slowed again. The shepherd turned his head. Lucy noticed immediately. Her smile widened. She raised the stuffed dog as though introducing an old friend. "Look," she said to her mother. "He looks like Major." Her mother's hand stopped for half a second. Then she stood. "A little." The answer was gentle, but something inside it carried weight. Ethan heard the name and glanced toward them. Atlas took 1 step sideways. "Stay with me," Ethan said quietly. Atlas obeyed, but his amber-brown eyes remained on Lucy. She studied him with the serious fascination children sometimes gave animals, as though adults had forgotten a language she still understood. "Can I pet him?" she asked. Ethan stopped several feet away. "He is working right now." Lucy nodded without disappointment. "That is okay. Major worked too." Her mother looked at Ethan. "Sorry. She loves German shepherds. Nothing to apologize for." Ethan started forward again. Atlas followed. 3 steps later, the dog looked back. Lucy had turned away, but something about her movement caught Ethan's attention. She reached for her mother's hand, missed it, then tried again. Her shoulders seemed lower than before. Her mother offered her a bottle of water. Lucy took it, but did not drink. Atlas stopped. Ethan felt the leash tighten. "Atlas, heel." The shepherd moved forward reluctantly. Ethan looked down at him. "What is it?" Atlas could not answer, but his nose lifted toward the air. The airport continued around them, indifferent and bright. A boarding announcement sounded overhead. Somewhere nearby, a child laughed. Lucy pressed the stuffed German shepherd against her chest and closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, Atlas was watching her again. This time, the little girl did not smile. Atlas stopped so suddenly that Ethan felt the leash draw tight across his palm. This time there was no hesitation in the dog, no uncertain glance, no moment of deciding whether the scent mattered. His paws settled against the polished floor, shoulders rigid, eyes fixed on Lucy. "Atlas, heel." The command was quiet and familiar. Atlas did not move. Ethan tried again. "Heel." Nearby, Ben Carter lowered his coffee. A transportation security officer noticed the German shepherd's posture and immediately looked toward the security line. Within seconds, the ordinary rhythm around gate 42 began to change. People slowed. A man pulled his suitcase closer. A woman guided her 2 children behind her. Someone whispered that the police dog had found something. Ethan barely heard them. Atlas was not looking at luggage. He was not scanning the crowd. He was looking only at Lucy. The little girl stood beside her mother with the stuffed German shepherd tucked beneath one arm. Her face had lost its earlier color. "Mom," she whispered. Her mother turned. "What is it, honey?" Lucy did not answer. Atlas lowered his head. A soft whine escaped him. Ethan had heard that sound only a handful of times, never during a search. It was not warning. It was concern. "Easy, buddy," Ethan murmured. Atlas took one careful step toward Lucy. Her mother instinctively moved closer to her daughter. "Officer, is something wrong?" Ethan studied Lucy. "I do not know yet." Lucy looked at Atlas, and for one strange second the noise of the airport seemed to fall away. Her fingers loosened. The stuffed dog slipped from her hand and landed softly beside her shoe. "Major," she breathed. Atlas's ears lowered. Then Lucy swayed. Her mother reached for her, but Atlas moved first. The German shepherd crossed the few feet between them and pressed his body against Lucy's legs just as her knees weakened, giving her something solid to lean against while Ethan stepped forward and caught her by the shoulders. "I have her." Lucy's mother dropped beside them. "Lucy? Honey, look at me." Ethan eased the girl carefully to the floor. Atlas lay beside her without being told, his body close but still, his eyes fixed on her face. Ben was already calling for airport medical personnel. The whispers around them disappeared. No one cared about luggage anymore. No one stepped backward from the dog. Lucy's mother held her daughter's hand, frightened but composed. She was fine this morning. Ethan glanced at Atlas. The shepherd's breathing was calm, but his attention had not changed. He knew. Someone murmured from behind the security rope. Ethan heard it. So did Ben. Within moments, 2 airport paramedics hurried through the crowd with a medical bag. Atlas shifted aside to give them room, but he refused to leave. Lucy opened her eyes briefly and looked toward him. "Major," she whispered again. Her mother went completely still. Ethan saw the expression on her face and understood that the name meant something far deeper than a child confusing one German shepherd for another. But before he could ask, Atlas turned away from Lucy for the first time. His nose lifted toward the small backpack lying several feet away. Then he looked at Ethan, and the quiet certainty in those amber-brown eyes made one thing clear. Whatever Atlas had noticed that morning, he was not finished yet. The paramedics worked quietly around Lucy while Atlas remained fixed on the small backpack near the security rope. Ethan knew that look. It was not distraction. It was insistence. "Atlas, stay." The German shepherd obeyed, but his eyes never left the bag. Lucy's mother noticed. "What does he want?" Ethan glanced from Atlas to the backpack. "I am trying to figure that out." One paramedic checked Lucy's pulse while the other spoke gently to her. Her eyes, for a second, grief crossed her face so clearly that Ethan almost felt he had intruded on something private. "You know that name?" he said softly. She nodded. Major was her father. Ethan looked at Lucy, then back at the woman. "His name was Major?" "No," she swallowed. "Major Daniel Bennett, United States Marine Corps." Ethan went still. The airport noise returned around them in fragments. A boarding call, rolling luggage, the hiss of an espresso machine somewhere beyond the crowd. He was her father? Yes. Her voice softened. Daniel died 4 years ago. Lucy was only 4. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her phone. Her fingers trembled as she searched through photographs. Finally, she held the screen toward Ethan. The picture had been taken beneath a bright desert sky. A young Marine stood smiling beside a German shepherd wearing a working harness. Daniel Bennett was tall, fair-skinned, with sandy brown hair and the easy expression of a man caught between duty and home. Beside him sat a dark-coated shepherd with alert ears and amber eyes. Ethan looked down at Atlas. The resemblance was striking enough to explain Lucy's confusion, but not enough to explain Atlas. "That dog was Major's partner?" Ethan asked. Lucy's mother gave a faint, sad smile. "His name was Ranger." Lucy called Daniel Major because she heard the word once and thought it was his first name. After he died, she kept calling him that whenever she talked about him. Ethan studied the photograph again. Atlas stepped closer, nose lifted toward the phone, then turned abruptly toward the backpack. This time he gave a low whine. Lucy's mother followed his gaze. Her expression changed. Her medical information. She hurried to the bag and opened it. I forgot. Everything is in here. She pulled out a small medical pouch and handed it to the paramedic. Her doctor gave us this for travel. Her emergency information and medication are inside. The paramedic read the card, then looked at his partner with immediate recognition. This helps. Ethan exhaled slowly. Atlas had not been staring at a threat. He had been watching a child. Then he had watched the one thing everyone else had forgotten. Lucy's mother knelt beside the shepherd and stopped just short of touching him. How did he know? Ethan looked at Atlas, but the dog was staring at something else now. The worn German shepherd stuffed animal still lay on the floor. Atlas walked to it, lowered his nose, and inhaled once. His entire body became still. Then he made a sound Ethan had never heard before, a quiet, aching whine that seemed less like recognition than memory. Atlas lowered his nose to the stuffed German shepherd again and breathed in slowly, as if the faded fabric carried a story hidden beneath years of dust, laundry soap, and a child's embrace. Ethan watched the change in him. The shepherd's tail remained still. His ears softened. Even his breathing seemed different. Where did Lucy get that? Ethan asked. Her mother looked at the toy lying between Atlas's paws. From Daniel. Her voice was quiet now. He gave it to her before his last deployment. She was barely 3. Ethan crouched beside Atlas. Was it new? No. Daniel had kept it for a while. She hesitated, searching through memories. It traveled with him. He said one of the handlers at his training facility gave it to him as a joke because Ranger kept stealing it from a supply room. Ethan looked up. Training facility? A military canine program in California. I do not remember the exact name. Something moved through Ethan's memory. Before Atlas entered police service, he had spent his early training months at a military working dog facility in California. Ethan had seen the records years ago, names and dates printed on pages that had seemed unimportant then. He remembered Atlas being transferred out after an evaluation placed him on a law enforcement track. There had been dozens of dogs there, dozens of handlers, lives crossing briefly before separating forever. What year? Ethan asked. She told him. Ethan's hand stopped against Atlas's shoulder. The dates matched. Not proof, not even close, but enough to make the terminal suddenly feel smaller. Atlas nudged the stuffed dog with his nose and released another quiet whine. Lucy's mother covered her mouth. Ranger used to do that. Ethan looked at her. Do what? That sound. Her eyes filled, though she smiled through it. Daniel sent videos. Whenever Ranger wanted that toy, he made this ridiculous little whine like he was asking permission. Ethan looked down at Atlas. The German shepherd stared at the toy, then toward Lucy. The paramedics had helped her sit upright. Color was slowly returning to her cheeks. She watched Atlas from several feet away, her expression tired but peaceful. Maybe he remembers Ranger, her mother whispered. Ethan did not answer immediately. Dogs could remember scents for years. They could detect changes in the human body long before people noticed them. Training sharpened those abilities, but sometimes even experienced handlers were left wondering where training ended and something deeper began. Ethan picked up the toy carefully and offered it to Atlas. The shepherd smelled one worn ear, then stepped away. He did not want the toy. He wanted Lucy. Atlas crossed the short distance and sat beside her. Lucy raised one hand. Can I pet him now? Ethan felt something tighten behind his ribs. He nodded. Yeah, you can. Her small fingers settled gently between Atlas's ears. The shepherd closed his eyes for one brief second. Lucy smiled. You knew Major? Atlas opened his eyes and looked at her. Ethan had no answer to give. Neither did Lucy's mother. Somewhere above them, another flight was called, and hundreds of strangers continued toward places they needed to be. But beside Gate 42, a little girl rested her hand on a police dog who might have remembered a scent from years ago, from another dog, another Marine, another life. Ethan had spent years believing every signal had an explanation. That morning, for the first time, he wondered whether some explanations could be true without being complete. The paramedic finished reading Lucy's emergency card and gave her mother a reassuring nod. This explains what we are seeing. We caught it early. Those 4 words seemed to release something from the air around them. Lucy's mother lowered her head for a moment, one hand still wrapped around her daughter's fingers. Ethan stayed nearby with Atlas, giving the medical team room, but the German shepherd remained watchful. Lucy was breathing more comfortably now. The color in her face was slowly returning, and when she looked toward Atlas, he answered with a small movement of his ears. Then the paramedic reached for the medical pouch. Atlas stood. Ethan felt it before he understood it. The shepherd's posture changed again. Not alarm, not fear. Attention. Atlas stepped toward the backpack and touched his nose to the outer pocket. Atlas. Ethan watched carefully. The dog looked at him, then back at the bag. Once. Twice. There is something else in there? Lucy's mother asked. Maybe. Ethan crouched and pointed toward the backpack. Is everything important in that pouch? She looked uncertain. I thought so. Atlas pressed his nose against the side pocket again. Lucy's mother opened it and pulled out a folded envelope, a small prescription bottle, and another laminated card. Her eyes widened. This is the updated one. The paramedic took the card, read it, and immediately compared it with the first. Good catch. Her medication instructions changed last month. Lucy's mother stared at the German Shepherd. I packed that pocket last night. I completely forgot. The paramedic smiled gently. You remembered enough to bring it. That matters. But Ethan was looking at Atlas. Twice now, the dog had insisted when everyone around him had already decided they understood the situation. First Lucy, then the backpack. Ethan had spent enough years beside working dogs to respect what their noses could detect. Human bodies carried chemical changes people could not smell. Medicine had odors. Stress had odors. Fabric carried histories. None of that required a miracle. Yet facts did not make the moment feel ordinary. Lucy reached toward Atlas again. Did he know I was sick? She asked. Ethan knelt so they were closer to eye level. He knew something was different. Before I did. Ethan glanced at Atlas. Maybe before all of us. Lucy considered that with the seriousness only a child could give to a mystery. Then she smiled faintly. Major used to know things too. Her mother looked away, and Ethan understood she was not talking about a rank anymore. She was talking about her father as Lucy remembered him, not through dates or photographs, but through stories. The paramedics prepared to take Lucy to an airport medical room for observation before arranging further care. As her mother gathered their belongings, Ethan picked up the worn stuffed German Shepherd. Atlas leaned forward and smelled it once more. This time, Ethan noticed a tiny strip of faded fabric tied beneath the toy's collar. It looked older than the toy itself. Lucy's mother saw him looking. Daniel tied that on there after one of his training rotations, she said. He told Lucy it came from Ranger's old training lead. Ethan's fingers paused. Atlas stepped closer. His nose touched the faded strip, and his eyes softened. Suddenly, the possibility became almost painfully simple. Perhaps years earlier, two young German Shepherds had shared a kennel yard, a training field, a transport truck, or nothing more than a few passing mornings. Perhaps Atlas remembered Ranger's scent buried beneath years of Lucy's hugs. Perhaps that old scent had made him notice her long enough to detect the change in her body that everyone else missed. Ethan could not prove any of it. He did not need to. Lucy was lifted carefully onto a transport chair. Before they moved away, she looked at Atlas. Thank you. Atlas sat beside Ethan, silent and steady. Lucy's mother stopped in front of him. Officer Cole, I do not know what would have happened if he had kept walking. Ethan rested a hand on Atlas's neck. He would not have. The words came out before Ethan could think about them. And somehow, he knew they were true. The terminal slowly returned to its ordinary rhythm after Lucy disappeared down the corridor. Travelers moved again. Announcements resumed their importance. Coffee cooled in forgotten cups. Ben came to stand beside Ethan and looked down at Atlas. You said he notices what we miss. Ethan watched the empty corridor where Lucy had gone. Yeah. Ben waited. Ethan rubbed the shepherd gently behind one ear. I just never realized how much. Atlas looked up at him, then toward gate 42. For the first time that morning, he seemed completely at peace. 3 weeks later, snow was falling beyond the terminal windows when Atlas stopped near gate 42 again. This time, Ethan did not tighten the leash. He followed the German Shepherd's gaze and saw a little redcoat moving through the morning crowd. Lucy Bennett was walking beside her mother, not riding in a transport chair, not surrounded by medical personnel, just walking with the careful confidence of a child returning to a place that had once frightened everyone who loved her. She saw Atlas and stopped. Her whole face brightened. Mom. Her mother smiled. I see him. Lucy started forward, then remembered herself and slowed several feet away. "Officer Cole?" Ethan nodded. "Good morning, Lucy. Can I say hello?" Ethan looked down at Atlas. The shepherd was already sitting, tail sweeping once across the floor. "I think he would like that." Lucy approached and knelt. Atlas leaned forward until his forehead rested gently against her shoulder. She wrapped one arm around his neck and closed her eyes. No one spoke. Around them, travelers hurried toward gates. Announcements echoed beneath the high ceiling, and somewhere outside a jet rolled toward the runway. But for a few seconds, Lucy and Atlas seemed untouched by any of it. Her mother stood beside Ethan. "The doctors adjusted her treatment," she said quietly. "They told me getting that updated information when they did made everything easier." Ethan watched Lucy scratch beneath Atlas's chin. "She looks good." "She is." Her mother smiled, then looked down. "She wanted to come back before our next trip. She said she had something to show him." Lucy seemed to hear. She reached for the worn German Shepherd toy tucked beneath her arm and carefully loosened the faded strip around its collar. Something small slipped into her palm. A weathered military dog tag. She held it toward Ethan. The metal was scratched with age, its edges dulled from years of handling. "It was Dad's," Lucy said. "Mom found it in the box with Ranger's things." Ethan crouched beside her. Lucy turned the tag over, then held it near Atlas. "I thought maybe he would remember this too." Atlas leaned forward and smelled the metal. For a moment, nothing happened. Then his eyes lifted toward Lucy's mother before returning to the tag. His tail moved once. Slowly, Lucy smiled. "See? He knows." Ethan could have explained that Atlas might be recognizing old scents preserved on fabric or metal. He could have spoken about canine memory, training facilities, and the extraordinary sensitivity of a working dog's nose. All of it might have been true. Instead, he said, "Maybe he does." Lucy placed the tag gently against Atlas's harness. "Dad always said Ranger never forgot a friend." Ethan looked at the little girl, then at Atlas. "Your dad sounds like he understood dogs." "He understood people too," Lucy said. Her mother turned her face toward the windows, blinking against tears she did not try to hide. Atlas rose and walked to her without command. He pressed his shoulder lightly against her leg. She rested a hand on his head. "Thank you, Atlas," she whispered. Lucy picked up her stuffed dog and stood. Before leaving, she looked back at Ethan. "Do you think Atlas remembered Ranger?" Ethan glanced at his partner. "I think some things stay with us longer than we expect." Lucy seemed satisfied with that. She waved goodbye and disappeared with her mother into the crowd. Atlas watched until the red coat was gone. Then he looked up at Ethan, waiting. Ethan touched the harness gently. "All right, buddy." Atlas stepped forward, and together they returned to work, carrying one more memory through the endless moving heart of the airport. By late afternoon, the snow had stopped, leaving the runways beneath a pale winter sky washed with gold. Ethan and Atlas made their final walk through the terminal as sunlight poured through the tall windows and stretched long reflections across the polished floor. The morning crowds had thinned. A few families waited beneath departure screens. An airport employee stacked chairs near a coffee shop. Somewhere beyond the glass, an aircraft lifted into the quiet blue, its engines fading until only the familiar hum of the terminal remained. Ethan had walked this route hundreds of times, but Gate 42 no longer felt like an ordinary place. As they approached it, Atlas slowed. Ethan noticed immediately. 3 weeks earlier, that change in pace would have tightened every muscle in his body. Now he simply walked beside him. Atlas stopped near the same place where Lucy had fallen. His ears turned toward the gate. His nose lifted once, testing the air. Then he looked up at Ethan. "Yeah," Ethan said softly. "I remember too, buddy." Atlas remained still for another second before continuing. No command was needed. Ethan rested his hand against the shepherd's harness as they walked. He thought about Lucy's red coat disappearing into the crowd that morning, about the worn stuffed dog, the faded strip from Ranger's training lead, and the old dog tag she had carried back 3 weeks later. He thought about Daniel Bennett, a Marine Ethan had never met, and Ranger, a German Shepherd Atlas might once have known for only a few days, or perhaps only a few passing moments. There would probably never be a record explaining exactly what Atlas remembered. Maybe the scent of Ranger had survived in that old fabric. Maybe Lucy's changing body had carried a signal his trained nose understood before anyone else could see it. Maybe one discovery had simply led to another. Ethan could accept all of those explanations. They were reasonable. They were real. But years as a Marine had taught him something else too. Not everything meaningful arrived with proof. Sometimes a person appeared when someone needed them. Sometimes an old memory returned at exactly the right moment. Sometimes loyalty traveled farther than anyone expected. Atlas had not needed to understand Lucy's name, her father, or the history tied to a worn stuffed dog. He had only needed to notice her. And he had. In a building filled with thousands of footsteps, hundreds of voices, rolling suitcases, ringing phones, and people rushing towards somewhere else, one German shepherd had chosen to stop. Ethan looked down at his partner. Atlas walked calmly beside him now, black and tan coat glowing softly in the last sunlight, amber-brown eyes facing forward. "Good boy," Ethan whispered. Atlas's tail moved once. Nothing more. No applause followed them. No crowd gathered. No one at the gate knew why Ethan smiled as they passed. Somewhere beyond those windows, Lucy Bennett was going home with her mother, carrying an old dog tag and a story she might tell for the rest of her life. Ethan and Atlas continued toward the end of the terminal, their shadows moving together across the floor. Maybe Atlas had remembered a scent. Maybe he had remembered a friend. Or maybe loyalty leaves something behind long after the ones we love are gone, waiting quietly until the day someone needs to be found.